Okay, so when we talk about climate change, we usually talk about disaster, right? And for good reason. But there's this really uncomfortable side to the story that we don't often hear. What if climate change actually ends up making some places richer, while, the rest of the world foots the bill? Yeah, let's get into it. All right, first things first. Let's be absolutely clear. The big picture is not good. We're talking about a potential drop in global GDP of more than 20% by 2100 if we just let warming run wild. Now, to put that in perspective, that's a hit that's like 5 to 10 times bigger than what older models were predicting. It's a staggering loss for the entire planet. But, and this is the paradox we're really digging into today, what if that massive global loss isn't shared equally? What if, buried inside all that economic devastation, a few countries actually come out ahead, at least, on paper? This is a really shocking idea, right? So let's break it down. How can a global loss create regional winners, and what does that even mean for the future of, well, everything? Okay, so how in the world does this work? It all comes down to this really fascinating idea called the optimal economic temperature. Turns out, researchers have found that human productivity, and we're talking about everything from agriculture to factory output, hits its absolute peak when the average annual temperature is around 13 degrees Celsius or 55 Fahrenheit. Any hotter, and our work slows down. Any colder, and you're spending a ton more on things like heating. It's like a Goldilocks zone for economies. So as the whole planet heats up, you start to see this huge divide. Countries in the tropics, which are already hot, get pushed way past that economic sweet spot. And that's where you see these massive potential losses. But then you look at the cooler northern countries, think Canada, Scandinavia, parts of Russia. For them, a warming planet actually nudges them closer to that perfect 13-degree sweet spot. And the result? It's a direct hit on global inequality. I mean, look at these projections. By 2100, climate change could just decimate the average income in the poorest 40% of countries. We're talking a 75% drop. A 75% drop. And at the same time, the richest 20% of countries, they might actually see slight gains. This isn't just a shift. It's a massive temperature-driven transfer of wealth. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. How exactly does a country win in this scenario? What are the actual mechanics behind these advantages? Because it's not just one thing, it's a whole mix of factors. It really boils down to four main pathways. First, and we've already touched on this, is just better productivity as you get closer to that magic temperature. Second, you've got lower energy costs. Think about it. Warmer winters mean you're not spending as much on heating. Third, and this is a big one, is the opening of brand new economic frontiers, like new shipping routes in the Arctic. And fourth is this really interesting shift in tourism. We'll get to that in a sec. Let's zoom in on that third point, the new frontiers. This is an absolute game changer. As the Arctic ice melts, a new shipping lane, the Northern Sea Route, is opening up. Now, a trip from Shanghai to Rotterdam through the Suez Canal, that's around 21,000 kilometers. But if you go through the Arctic, it's only 14,000. You're saving 7,000 kilometers and shaving off about 10 days of travel. The geopolitical and economic consequences of this are just massive, especially for any country with an Arctic coastline. And then there's tourism. You've probably heard about this. As classic summer destinations in, say, the Mediterranean get just unbearably hot, people are starting to look for cool vacations. And where are they going? North. Tourism in Nordic countries is projected to see some serious growth, and places like the UK and Scotland are seeing a huge boom in demand. Money, specifically tourist dollars, is literally following the nice weather. Okay, but this is where the story takes a sharp turn. It is so important to understand that every single one of these potential gains comes with a serious, and I mean devastating, trade-off. A win for a country's GDP number doesn't mean it's a win for the people living there or for the environment. Let's use Canada as an example. On the one hand, you have a pretty clear potential benefit, right? Even the Canadian government points out that longer growing seasons mean new opportunities for farming. You're seeing crops like corn and soybeans being planted further and further north, in places they could never grow before. But here's the other side of that coin. Those exact same warm, dry conditions, they're the ones fueling the catastrophic wildfires we've been seeing, which come with unbelievable economic and health costs. Not to mention the droughts and the thawing permafrost that's wrecking essential infrastructure like roads and pipelines. So yeah, Canada might sell more corn, but the price it's paying for that is just enormous. And that really gets to the heart of it. These big national average numbers, the GDP figures, they can hide a world of pain. A country's economy can look like it's growing on paper, but that single number tells you nothing about the actual communities being shattered by floods, by fires, or by the collapse of the ecosystems they depend on. So the key takeaway here is that even inside these so-called winning countries, there are huge numbers of losers. You have indigenous communities in the Arctic whose entire way of life is being turned upside down. You have small farmers now dealing with brand new pests and completely unpredictable weather. It's often the coastal towns and rural areas that take the biggest hit from the environmental damage, even while the big cities might be doing okay. So where does this leave us? What does this whole paradox actually mean for the future? How does it change the conversation about global power, about justice, about the kind of world we're all building? Well, the single biggest consequence is that it throws gasoline on the fire of inequality. Climate change here is acting like a threat multiplier. It takes the economic gap that already exists between rich and poor nations and just blows it wide open. And, crucially, it does the exact same thing inside every country, widening the gap between the well-off and the vulnerable. So look, climate change is almost certainly going to make the world poorer as a whole, but it's also going to shuffle the deck, shifting power, wealth, and opportunity in ways we're only just starting to understand. And that leaves us with one last really important question. The point isn't just to figure out who gets richer, right? The real question is, what do we do with that knowledge? Are we going to use this understanding to try and build a fairer, safer future for everyone? Or are we just going to sit back and watch this inequality gap become an unbridgeable chasm?